Beyond the Forecast with Grant Tosterud, the science of weather in New Mexico. What makes the Land of Enchantment so unique? To understand, let's go Beyond the Forecast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Forecast, where we get a chance to dive into the science of New Mexico's weather. I'm Chief Meteorologist Grant Tosterud, joined today by Meteorologist Josh Redwine. And Josh, today we're talking about one of my favorite weather phenomenons in New Mexico, the monsoon.
Absolutely. And it's so cool that it's just, so localized and so perfect for New Mexico. This is the perfect topic for us to talk about.
Right, exactly. Yeah, this is what makes it so unique. And one of the things I like so much about it is that it's very specific to this part of the country. Not a lot of other parts of the United States get to talk about this kind of weather phenomenon because it really is kind of just takes place mostly in Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, and then parts of Colorado and Utah as well. So when people come to New Mexico and don't really know a lot about the weather, they don't even know what the monsoon is. Half the people in New Mexico don't even know what the monsoon is either.
Exactly. It's so interesting to, dive deep into it and get the ins and outs of what it really is and how it affects us.
I completely agree. Well, for those who don't know, the monsoon, or more formally known as the North American monsoon, also called the Southwest monsoon, is a seasonal shift in wind direction that brings increased moisture and thunderstorms to the southwestern part of the United States and northwestern Mexico. Now, before we get too deep into that, the monsoon does occur in other parts of the world as well. In fact, the other more famous monsoon is probably in India, where that monsoon pattern as well brings them a lot of rain. But for us, we're just going to be focusing on the North American monsoon.
Sticking here with us.
Exactly. Now, the big question is, where does all this moisture come from? Well, it primarily comes from the Gulf of California, the Gulf of Mexico, and the tropical Eastern Pacific Ocean, especially if there's hurricanes. Yeah. That can really help to bring a lot of moisture here into New Mexico. So let's take a look at one of our weather graphics here, kind of showing you how the monsoon sets up. The monsoon is a change, like we said, in wind direction. When you go from usually this west to east weather pattern that draws and dries air into New Mexico, but the monsoon marks when we get that change in wind direction. That's when we can really say that the monsoon has begun. The ideal pattern setup is you have this high pressure system off to the east of New Mexico and a low pressure system off to the west of us. Those two work together to draw up that moisture into New Mexico, and that moisture is the key ingredient to bring us showers and thunderstorms sometimes on a daily basis. But there's a few things that really drive the monsoon. You need those hotter temperatures. This is the reason we see the monsoon develop in the summers, because you get that heating of the landmass and it creates that area of high pressure, which we saw as one of the main ingredients for the monsoon to draw up that moisture. You also need a low pressure system over the desert southwest, like we saw in that graphic there, to funnel that moisture up. And then that high pressure system continues to shift northward and can bring that moisture all the way up into places like Utah and Colorado. If we take a look at another one of our weather graphics we put together, it shows where the monsoon usually begins and sets up based on the time of the year. So it's usually early to mid-June that we start to see the moisture increase down across Mexico. And then by mid to late June, that moisture starts creeping farther and farther northward. And then eventually, once we get into early to mid-July, that's when that monsoon moisture starts moving into New Mexico and then into parts of Arizona. And you can see sometimes as well, even into parts of Utah and Colorado. So usually, we can get the monsoon to start right in the middle of June. Sometimes you can get the monsoon to continue even past September, but it's usually around that July period that the monsoon really starts settling into New Mexico.
And then a little bit of statistics. Back in 2006, it was the wettest monsoon that we have seen here in Albuquerque, getting up to 9.42 inches. But then just a few years before that, in 2003, we saw the driest with only 1.46 inches during the entire monsoon season.
Yeah, it can vary a lot from extremely dry to extremely wet. And even last year was actually one of the driest monsoon seasons on record in Albuquerque, despite a really strong start. And that average rainfall can vary quite a bit depending on where you are in the state. So this is a look at average rainfall for a few different places across New Mexico. Now, you'll notice that June total is a lot lower. Couple reasons for that, because we talked earlier about how the monsoon really kicks into high gear in July. But here we're also only looking at the second half of June average rainfall. So that's why it's going to be a lot lower than the others. So for Albuquerque, we usually get about 4.5 inches of rainfall out of the monsoon every year. So that's the middle of June through the end of September. And that's almost exactly half of our average yearly rainfall here in Albuquerque, with the majority of that falling during July.
Yeah, and then as you move up to Santa Fe, we're seeing very similar conditions there, where during the monsoon season, we see about 5.5 inches of rainfall. And like you were saying, June, typically see the lesser amounts of that. But then really peaking in July and August whenever we're getting that very, very good moisture pushing in from the Gulfs and from those tropical environments. And that allows us to get up to around 10 or so inches of rainfall there in Santa Fe.
Well, Roswell actually averages slightly more rainfall during the monsoon season. They're a little bit closer to the Gulf. It's easier for them to get that moisture. And they typically see even heavier rainfall during the monsoon season, where they get almost a little over 5.8 inches every year, or every monsoon season. On average, they get about 11.6 inches. So again, about half of their average rainfall during the monsoon season from the middle of June through the end of September. Well, we've kind of gone over now the overall picture for the monsoon season, kind of average patterns we expect to see, but what happens on a daily basis? So when we come back, we'll show you what you can expect on a daily basis during the monsoon. Stay with us. Welcome back to Beyond the Forecast, where today we're talking about the monsoon. It's one of our favorite weather phenomenons here in New Mexico because it often brings us some of our most active weather here in the state. Now, we were just talking about how the monsoon generally runs from about the middle of June all the way through the end of September, but it really starts peaking in early July. That's when we really start to see a lot of these daily rounds of showers and thunderstorms that can really bring in some big impacts for urban areas and across much of New Mexico. Now, one thing we do to really track the monsoon is actually look at dew point temperatures on a daily basis, because the monsoon is all about an increase in moisture into the state. And so one thing we do to you, or one thing we use to look at the amount of moisture in the atmosphere is dew points, like I said.
Absolutely. So, during the majority of the year, we're very dry climate. So we're seeing very dry weather, very dry air most of the year. So once that monsoon season really kicks in, you're really starting to feel the humidity, the dew points, the more of like a wetness on your skin as you step out the door, rather than, just the plain old heat.
New Mexico, we really start looking at dew points when they get into the 40s to kind of mark the beginning of that monsoon season. In one way, we let you at home know how active that day is going to be as we use what's called the monsoon meter. And this is based on the amount of moisture in the atmosphere. So we'll start with the monsoon meter that runs from 1 to 10. If it's a 1 for a day, usually means that it's very dry out there. We have very low dew points or even high pressures overhead, which means little or no storm activity.
Yeah, and then whenever we move up to around the 2 to 3, around 4, we typically see more of those mountain storms. So typically that are situated over those higher peaks, and we're seeing less activity in the valleys and those lower areas.
Exactly. 5, so we're about halfway up the scale now. Again, we're looking at mostly mountain storms, but then you start to see a few of those storms hold together and bring the chance for rain and thunderstorms down into the lower valleys. But you'll notice that the best chance for rain usually on a 5, again, up around the mountains. So you're going to be talking about the central mountain chain and then into the western half and northern parts of New Mexico.
And then we get into the higher numbers, the 7. So that's typically when we see some very soaking rain across those more mountainous regions, and we see those constant valley showers and storms moving through as well. So this is typically whenever we're starting to see more of those widespread conditions across the state.
Yeah, and then all the way up to a 10. This is going to be the top of the scale. This would be widespread rainfall all across New Mexico, or at least nearly all across New Mexico. And we'd have so much moisture in the atmosphere. This means that any of those storms would be capable of very heavy rainfall and flooding as well. And, sometimes it could depend, too, on the overall weather pattern we have. That makes it a little bit easier to know what direction the storms are going to go. So one of our meteorologist Ryan Phillips, has a little explainer here to show us some of the major monsoon patterns we see during the summer months, and also how that gives us an idea on where those showers and storms are going to go. So here's Ryan.
There are 4 different types of monsoon patterns that are very common here in the Land of Enchantment. Usually deals with high pressures and low pressures, and high pressures are the commonality with these 4 weather patterns. The first type of pattern, you have a high pressure in Texas. With that clockwise flow, you often get a surge of moisture from not only the Gulf, but also the Pacific with that low pressure that will funnel all that moisture into the Land of Enchantment. You could get a really stormy pattern that way. And another type of monsoon pattern is with a high pressure stuck in the 4 corners. You often get Gulf moisture, maybe a little bit of Pacific moisture as well. All that moisture goes from south to north. What that usually means are very isolated, strong monsoonal thunderstorms that descend from the mountains. And that high pressure usually just kind of traps the moisture from really going anywhere. And another type of monsoon pattern, number 3, is as that high pressure moves far to the west or develops far to the west, it brings cooler, more moist air from the plains, because often in the summertime you can get more severe weather out there. That tropical moisture moves into the eastern highlands, kind of butts up against sometimes the San Diego, or even through the Tejedas Canyon in Albuquerque. You can often get some potent thunderstorms, monsoonal type of thunderstorms. And the 4th one often deals with trapped tropical systems that are remnants, and as this high pressure forms, that moisture just doesn't go anywhere, and it can circulate in a clockwise fashion around this high pressure, and we can have daily to sometimes weekly thunderstorms in the Land of Enchantment. So those are the 4 type of monsoon patterns that bring much needed moisture here in New Mexico.
All right, so like you said, high pressure is usually the key to a lot of these kind of monsoon patterns out there. It's pretty typical too. You know, you start out morning, usually sunny, dry across the state. Could be partly cloudy too, depending on the amount of moisture in the atmosphere. And then like clockwork, especially as you head late into the morning and the afternoon, those cumulus clouds start building up over the mountains. And then eventually thunderstorms develop from those cumulus clouds.
And then those thunderstorms are just, after they develop, they are then spreading out across the state, and they're bringing us those very, very heavy rainfalls. A lot of that time comes with some outflow boundaries and things like that then bring in some very gusty winds at times. We'll see a lot of blowing dust coming from it. And then it also brings us showers and storms in other parts of the state that we may not have expected to see it from that day.
Yeah. If you don't have a lot of steering pattern, meaning you don't have those upper level winds pushing those storms in a certain direction, it's usually outflow boundaries that'll bring Albuquerque its best chance for showers and thunderstorms. And here's what we mean by what an outflow boundary is. So we're talking about how these thunderstorms develop up over the mountains due to daytime heating, because that warm air rises over those mountain peaks faster than it does down here at the ground. So that's why you'll first see those clouds and those thunderstorms develop up over the higher elevations earlier in the day and in the afternoon, especially if we have a lot of moisture in the atmosphere. Then they can develop really quickly. Those upper level winds will sometimes steer those storms in a certain direction depending on the pattern we have overhead. And then when those rain and thunderstorms produce all of that heavy rainfall, it causes some cooler air down at the ground. And that's that outflow boundary that fans out in every direction from that storm. And it's those outflow boundaries that can then force the air upwards, creating more showers and thunderstorms down into the lower elevations.
Yeah, and we see that a lot of the cases, especially across eastern portions of the state. So we'll see the storms that all develop across the central mountain chain, and then as that outflow boundary just pushes further out to the east, and that will then bring in those more severe storms at times, and bring in those severe thunderstorm warnings, those tornado warnings even at times.
Yeah, and if you ever to look at an average map too of what the average rainfall looks like in New Mexico, you'll notice that a lot of the heaviest of the rain here in the state falls over the mountains. It's because that higher elevation. A lot of those showers and thunderstorms first develop across the mountain ranges as well. So that can all enhance in some of these showers and thunderstorms across New Mexico, especially when you get those outflow boundaries to collide. But like we said earlier in the show, we really have to watch out for tropical systems, especially in the eastern Pacific or into the Gulf, and that can really bring us some of the heaviest rainfall during the monsoon season. And there was a perfect example of this as well.
Yeah, back in 2008, there was Hurricane Dolly that was out in the Gulf that then ended up moving across Texas into northern Mexico, and it brought us some substantial amount of moisture, especially across southern portions of the state.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a nice little graphic about this too. If Josh, you can talk about this, about Hurricane Dolly.
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw that dry air that was pushing in from the west as we normally do, but we typically need to watch those eastern Pacific areas, the Gulf, and that is where most of those tropical storms that would impact us are coming from. So back in 2008 in July, the remnants of Hurricane Dolly brought in very, very heavy rainfall to southern portions of the state. It pretty much just tracked right along the Rio Grande there up the Texas border into New Mexico, and that brought in some very, very powerful, very substantial amount of rainfall. Over 6 inches was recorded in Ruidoso, and that in turn caused a lot of hazards across that area. 900 people were required to be rescued, 500 structures were damaged, and then one person was also killed in Rio Ruidoso flooding, bringing in $15 to $20 million worth of damage.
Yeah, it was a really impactful storm that came during the monsoon season. You got that pattern to set up to draw all that tropical moisture up into the state. Yeah, definitely an incredible storm for sure. Yeah, so we're touching a little bit now on the impacts of the monsoon season from flash flooding, but there's also many other impacts that the monsoon season brings. When we come back, we'll show you what some of those other impacts are, so stay with us. Welcome back again to Beyond the Forecast, where we continue to talk about the monsoon. The monsoon is really important to New Mexico because it brings some much needed rainfall just in the span of a couple months. Like we talked about earlier, it can bring as much as 40 to 60% of our annual average rainfall just in those summer months here in New Mexico. So it brings some much needed moisture. It can help with recharging aquifers and lakes and reservoirs, and can act as a Band-Aid too, especially if we've been seeing drought conditions previously in the winter or even in the spring. But sometimes all of that rain can fall in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings in that concern of flash flooding, which we see very regularly during the monsoon season, especially across those burn-scarred areas, in the arroyos and ditches and places like that. A lot of rain falling at a very quick amount of time is then just, it has to go somewhere. So it's carried down those arroyos, and then it can cause major issues. And I actually sat down with a MAFCA here in Albuquerque and did a story about the arroyos and the ditches here and what impacts that the monsoon has on those areas and what they can see.
Flooding is one of the deadliest natural disasters in the United States. In New Mexico, one of the most dangerous places during flash floods are in the arroyos.
So arroyos are natural channels, or they started as natural channels, and then through the process of development, most of the arroyos in town became hard-lined or concrete-lined throughout at least the eastern part of town.
So what exactly are arroyos doing?
In the Albuquerque area, we have a unique situation that doesn't really occur in most other cities. We are dry almost the whole year, followed by a quarter of the year's worth of rain in a few hours.
And all that rain has to go somewhere.
So as rain falls across the ground, it begins to collect in different locations. The idea is to control that collection and transport it away from people's houses. So these arroyos, particularly on the east side, were designed to move water very quickly away from the developed areas and convey it to the river.
Albuquerque specifically poses a unique challenge when strong storms move through.
What makes Albuquerque unique is we actually have a lot of topography. So we can get water moving very fast. In some places, the water will be moving 35 miles an hour. That's enough to knock you over.
Arroyos can flow when there's no rain at all.
Sometimes it rains in the mountains or rains some distance away. Because of the efficiency of these arroyos, they'll carry that water very quickly from one place to another, and it may not be raining on you at the time when a large amount of water comes down. Even the smaller storms can build up a huge amount of water really quickly. We've seen it, and it really is a wall of water that comes down. We went from no water to about 4.5 feet of water in 30 seconds. So that's why it's so dangerous for people to be in here.
There are multiple ways that people can receive warnings when flash flooding occurs.
So the National Weather Service actually provides us with a warning. And then right now we have a manual system where AMAFCA, the city, several city departments, Parks and Rec, they will all go out and issue a verbal warning to these locations.
Bottom line is, stay out of ditches and arroyos.
That's the key. Don't enter to start with, and you'll be safe.
And one thing I really wanted to touch base on about that package there is, like we were saying, like, it doesn't have to be raining where you are to see that flash flooding coming in. We can have showers and storms to the north of the city, up in Bernalillo, or even up towards Santa Fe, and it can still push in a lot of those showers or those water, that flooding across the arroyos here in the Albuquerque metro, and then causes those very dangerous conditions. So, like we were saying in the story there, never go into the arroyos to begin with, because it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, ditch the ditches, as they always say.
There you go. Exactly.
Yes, we talked a little bit about urban flooding with the monsoon, but burn scar flash flooding is also something we deal with every single year, especially with how many fires and wildfires we've had here in New Mexico over the last couple of years, and we're going to continue to deal with that. Sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years for some of these burn scar areas to finally heal, and you don't have to worry about burn scar flash flooding as much, but the good thing about the monsoon is that usually signifies an end to the fire season here in New Mexico. But then if you had significant wildfires that year or even years before, all of that monsoon rain, especially up over the mountains, can lead to burn scar flash flooding.
Yeah.
So what happens is during those fires that it burns so hot that it kind of acts as a sealant on that ground. So when the water does fall over those burn scarred areas, that it can't soak into the ground. So it just runs straight off and creates these debris flows and walls of water sometimes that can rush down. And like we saw in Ruidoso in 2024, how impactful and dangerous that flash flooding can be as well. If you ever hear a thunderstorm or see a thunderstorm off in the distance, best thing is to go inside and protect yourself and shelter yourself until they're gone.
Exactly. Just head inside for a little bit.
Yeah.
Just ride it out.
Exactly. Well, the monsoon is just incredibly important, though, for New Mexico, as it brings us about half of our average rainfall just during the monsoon season, which runs from the middle of June through the end of September, and is really important both to the agriculture in the state, the amount of water we get every year, and it's part of the culture here in New Mexico, too. Everybody loves the monsoon and loves those thunderstorms every summer.
It's always the highlight of the year.
It sure is. Well, remember that you can always stay up to date on the weather by watching KRQE or KRQE Now, and by going to krqe.com. You can also find us all on social media. Please join us again next week for another episode of Beyond the Forecast.